Trains.
I have heard of trains. They run on rails.
Yes, and I finally had the opportunity this weekend to complete something I've wanted to do my entire life.
Yourself.
Ever since that one episode
on a train.
That episode of Reading Rainbow. Did either of you ever watch that episode of Reading Rainbow where LeVar Burton takes Amtrak?
I don't remember most episodes of Reading Rainbow because I was a very small child, other than the one where he went on the set of Star Trek The Next Generation. And I was like, wait a second, he's the guy from Star Trek?
Ever since watching that episode of Reading Rainbow as a little kid, where LeVar Burton goes on Amtrak and he gets one of the little like private cars and he shows what it looks like, I've been like, I want to ride a train and have my own room. And this weekend, I am heading back up to the great state of Michigan to do stuff with family. I'm recording remotely, which is why I might sound a little different. And to get here, I took a train all the way from New York to Chicago.
You did the Steve Reich song in reverse.
Sure.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only podcast to do that Steve Reich song in reverse. I am the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Bryans.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
And Josh has gone from Chicago to New York, but in the other direction.
I don't know what song this is.
It's different trains. It's Steve Reich. He's very important. He's
different trains,
extremely
different
cool.
Brains.
I hate. You guys have no culture.
I mean, when it comes to trains, there's one type of brain in particular that they appeal to.
Yeah, well, and speaking of trains and speaking of our listeners, Happy Pride.
Yes.
It is Pride Month.
Happy Pride, everybody.
And so we thought we would actually get into this month by talking about Broadway, because it's back, folks.
It is.
And
nothing
one thing
gayer than Broadway.
Exactly. Except for maybe $3 bills or Paris. As we're getting into this month, we thought it would be good. We think it's always good for people to learn a little bit of queer history. And of course, that involves the very unpleasant but necessary subject of the AIDS pandemic. There are a lot of plays that have become canonized to the point where we make fun of the whole concept now because there's so many ideas in those plays that have been just like drilled in, and every AIDS play has to touch on that point. I feel for most people, most young people, most people in our generation and younger, their first AIDS play of sorts would probably be Rent. I think.
Oh, yeah. Oh, of course.
Yeah. We'd all agree on that. Yeah.
It's the most easily accessible, right? Because you can listen to the soundtrack wherever on Spotify, but it's not like your local regional theater is putting on Perestroika along with Millennium Approaches back to back, you know?
The thing that we like talking about on this show is all sorts of narratives, right? I mean, we obviously have a particular fascination with evangelical Christian shit and reactionary shit more broadly. But there are other kinds of narratives that also make their way sort of into the collective understanding. And regarding AIDS plays specifically, because the living memory of AIDS in a lot of cases died with the people who had it.
Absolutely.
Our understanding of that period of time, I think, is somewhat distorted. I mean, I say that myself as somebody who, like, speaking as somebody who knows people, family members even, who were alive during that period and saw a lot of friends die, you obviously hear about the pain of it and what it was, but you also don't hear about the joy that came alongside those things, because when you're going through a period of tremendous suffering and loss and anger, so much of which could have been easily preventable were it for government action, it becomes difficult to think about anything other than the loss. Not obviously like we have any frame of reference for what that looks like.
No, not at all.
If you're worried that this episode is going to be nothing but like doom and gloom, we are going to do our best throughout to explore all sides of what it means to be alive, because that's really that's what this comes down to. And because it's Pride Month, I guess that's the real point that I wanted to make up top here. The importance of covering this stuff is not just to reckon with these painful losses in our history, but also to realize what a gift it is that we have the lives that we are given to be able to still live openly and honestly and unapologetically, even during a time that right now looks about as dark as it has ever been, at least sort of in the, I don't know, rules-based international liberal order.
Yeah. And this play that we're talking about today is a play called As Is, and it's known as the first AIDS play. It's not exactly, we'll get there, but this play took, I don't know, a little bit more than 2 years to write and get up on its feet and get produced off Broadway.
On Broadway, and then on Broadway.
And with its with the other play that came out basically at the exact same time, The Normal Heart, that was written in an even shorter period of time.
When we talk about these kinds of plays too, as compared to like COVID, a big part of the reasons that these plays exist is that it is an early attempt at making sure that these stories are not forgotten.
Yeah.
Because to the point of COVID, how we think about that period, particularly like the really acute period of the pandemic, how we think about it is still something that is very much up for, it's up for grabs. People are fighting about it. There are a lot of people who would just prefer to pretend that it never happened at all. And the whole reason for these AIDS plays was to prevent that from happening. And though they now obviously have sort of their, I guess, cliches and trappings as we see them now 40 years later, it's undeniably true that without them, we would have lost yet another piece of what this period was.
Absolutely. A book that I was reading, I didn't read the whole book, but that I was reading for this episode is a book called Acts of Intervention by David Roman. And I don't always agree with all of his analysis. His is it's historical, but it's also like focused on kind of the theoretical. And it showed that early gay activism has so much to do with performance, and early AIDS activism was performance. And it was done at theaters, in front of theaters, around theaters. That was one of the first places that they mobilized people. And so it just made sense to start putting it in the theater, putting it on the stage.
When you think about the demographics of gay men in New York in the 1980s, like, it's going to be guys who love theater.
This was a place to congregate. It was either this or, unfortunately, fucking funerals was the other big like social event of the 1980s in the queer community.
We'll talk more in depth about AIDS and about the history of AIDS activism when we cover The Normal Heart, because that's what that play is about. But worth noting, right, just to get the timeline of when this play comes out, As Is by William Hoffman came out in March of 1985. The first article written about AIDS, where they were starting to recognize that there was a disease spreading in specific clusters, was in 1981.
Wow.
Right, in a gay New York newspaper. And these clusters were noting like odd infections. It would be strange to see even really one in a year. And then all of a sudden you have these small groups, their main commonality being that they're gay men, suffering from fungal pneumonia, suffering from cytomegalovirus, and Kaposi sarcoma, a very rare cancer of the lining of blood vessels.
Yes, or KS for short.
Yes, KS. And that has a very distinctive, you can see it on a person's body, right? It has a purple lesion, and you can see it on someone's face or their leg or their abdomen or something. It was clear that like this commonality was like, there has to be something related to sex. There has to be something related to some kind of fluid exchange. And it must be attacking immunity, because most of these diseases are seen in people who just have like a shot immune system. And very soon after, you start to just see people dying left and right, because it turned out the earliest cases of this were people who had been infected, in many cases years earlier, because it has this incubation period of anywhere from a few months to you can even get infected, not have symptoms, and then get sick more than a decade later. It was a time bomb that just started going off. So to talk about the playwright of the play that we're talking about this week, William Hoffman, or William M. Hoffman, because there is another writer named William Hoffman, so he uses his middle initial. William Hoffman's parents were from the Russian Empire. His father was from Bialystok, modern-day Poland, and his mother was from Latvia. And his mother owned when they moved to New York, his mother started a costume jewelry store on Dyckman Street.
Oh, hell yeah.
Up in Inwood,
wow.
Manhattan. For people who don't know, Inwood is the kind of the top of Manhattan, and it's still full of like tall buildings, but it's very quaint. It's a very quaint part of the island. William Hoffman's uncle was actually, I guess, a pretty successful Yiddish playwright in Bialystok. His mother also did some work on movies in Berlin before coming to America. So he has a little bit of show business in his family. Then he didn't really have much of an interest. He'd go to the theater a few times as a kid and said it was boring. So he went to City College and majored in Latin instead. He wanted to be a poet or something.
Yes, because that uncle who was also a playwright was also a poet in addition.
Yeah.
So it was like he was going to take one of his career paths. He just didn't quite know which one yet.
Man, everything I read about City College from like the 30s through to the 70s sounds like it was the fucking place to be.
Absolutely. And he got involved. I don't know why. Again, he said that theater bored him. He didn't quite explain where he got bit by the bug, I guess, but he got involved with some small experimental theaters, Cafe Chino, La Mama, which is still around, and Circle Repertory Theater. Circle Rep would eventually produce As Is. He was a director at first, but then he made a bunch of friends who were playwrights, and he said he was, quote, jealous of the applause. So he started writing as well.
That's a fucking mood.
And then later on, he became like an editor. He became like a big voice for like publishing other playwrights, and he had an interview show. And it makes it really annoying because you try to look up like William Hoffman interviews, and it's him interviewing other people.
Oh, sure. But he was big about sort of promoting the community around him.
Absolutely.
You know, maybe not at first. Brian, you sent us that wonderful article where he talks about how he thought he had to be the first person to write the AIDS play, and anyone else writing an AIDS play was like getting out on his turf because only he understood it.
I think there's two William Hoffmans. There is the William Hoffman that actually existed, and there's the William Hoffman writing about William Hoffman, which is very unkind to himself.
Yeah.
I think he's very bitchy in the articles or not even in the interviews, just in the forewords and stuff that he writes about his experience, about like a joke he said when he first heard about like a couple of men dying of something, a couple of gay men dying of something. And he said, oh, what, an overdose of poppers?
Or he says, it must be a combination of quiche and leather.
Yeah.
Was the other one. He kind of changes the joke depending on which one you're reading, which
and
intro to this play you're reading.
I've met some people who knew him because he passed away in the 2010s, and they all describe him as just like such a sweet, like a gentlemanly guy.
I mean, speaking as somebody who tends to write about himself in a way that is not particularly kind, I get it.
Yeah, that sweetness and that gentlemanliness comes through in the writing of As Is as well.
As
right?
is a very empathetic and kind play.
You would never read As Is and be like, did Larry Kramer write this?
You know, we put this in the title. This is the first AIDS play. This is a thing that's referred to as the first AIDS play. It's not. It's not the first AIDS play. Sorry,
That's
we
right.
lied.
We lied to you.
Happy Pride.
Titles of podcasts lie to you to get you to listen.
Happy Pride, more like Happy Lied. I'm cool,
Got 'em.
Voltaire. The first AIDS play is usually acknowledged to be a play called One, which started in Chicago. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a one-man play. It's the first AIDS play. It's kind of like, it's the most appropriate title. I'm sure there probably are a couple short plays that precede it. But One is the one that gets noted, especially in that book, Acts of Intervention. And this was made by a guy named Jeff Hagedorn. He performed it, never did it in a theater.
Oh. Was he
was
doing it in like
outside?
parks and shit? Or?
This was the extension of the activism and of the fundraising and this idea of like sort of an educational piece of drama. So it was a monologue performed by someone who has just learned that he has been diagnosed with HIV.
Oh, shit.
Oh.
And it's a half hour long. And he did it. Yeah, he did it at schools. He did it at community centers. He did it at a church once.
Was it always him doing it, or did he have other people do it as well?
I think other people started to do it. I'm not really sure. And it was always just as a fundraiser, which was part of why it didn't play at theaters, because it was like, no, all the money goes to awareness and the hotline and everything else that's going on right now to address this. From there, we have other plays that are also done specifically, explicitly, and exclusively as fundraisers, like in Atlanta in 1984. So one is 1983, 2 years after we get the first article about AIDS. A lesbian playwright named Rebecca Ranson, whose name is always misspelled online. There are some very good websites that have good information, but they keep spelling it ransom half the time. It's Ranson, S-O-N. And this play is called Warren. This was done at Seven Stages Theater in Atlanta originally. And it's an actual play. It's a one act. I think it's a little bit over an hour. Warren was about a group of people who knew this. I mean, that was just a real guy that she knew, that Rebecca Ranson knew. And he had passed away. And she wrote a play about remembering him. Also in 1984, we get a review in San Francisco. So not exactly a play. Theater Rhinoceros produces the AIDS show. And so the AIDS show was sketches, musical numbers. It opens in the future with someone holding up a headline that says Vaccine Day on the day where there's finally an HIV vaccine. And here we are, 40 years later.
Yeah.
So that one started as like a week-long engagement that then ran for over a year. It got filmed. It got broadcast on TV. There was a little bit of TV going on, a little bit of movies going on that were addressing AIDS at this point. There was a movie called Buddies, which was an independent film in New York, which was about a system put together by Gay Men's Health Crisis, which was about volunteering to be a buddy, going to the hospital and just hanging out with someone who's sick. And there's also a TV movie made at this time called An Early Frost. People are watching these. Straight people are watching these. Gay people are watching these. People have heard about the disease at this point and they want to get information. And we had quite a lot of good information at this point. When we go to New York, there are actually 2 AIDS plays being made in 1984. A handful of months before As Is will play at Circle Rep. Robert Chesley wrote the more famous one, something called Night Sweat.
Yes.
Which I couldn't find a published version of anywhere. Maybe I wasn't looking in the right places.
What?
This is editing Brian cutting in to say that you can find this play published in an out-of-print collection called Hard Plays Stiff Parts, the homoerotic plays of Robert Chesley. Good luck finding it for less than $50.
No,
That's because the government didn't want you to see it, Brian. You see, they concocted AIDS in a
what Night
lab
Sweat
and
is
unleashed
about.
it on
Night
the
Sweat is
general
a very
public.
paranoid play. It's set in a gay nightclub. There's something kind of, cyberpunk feeling about it. It's like a sort of near future thing. This club is very high tech and it has individual rooms where you can, if you have AIDS, you can plan out a scenario where they kill you. Which actually seems like quite a premise, which is why I want to read this play. I just have to find a way to get a hold of it. He made a play a few years later called Jerker, which was about 2 gay men who start like a phone sex relationship. That is more well known and that has been published. Then there's another one that has no presence online whatsoever called Fever of Unknown Origin by Stephen Holt.
Steve Holt.
And this was done at Theater for the New City. So this is telling you a little bit about.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is
around in the 80s. Wow. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, not to go too deep into that, but Theater for the New City, an absolutely insane community theater in the East Village.
Yeah.
I did a show there called A Nasty Tempered Man by Carolyn Moses.
That is the most Theater for a New City ass play I've ever heard, AJ.
My older co-star in it, who is, I believe, in his early 70s
this was that guy.
This was that guy. Got Legionnaire's disease and decided he wanted to die on stage and had a mini heart attack midway through the show.
What?
And I had to carry him off stage, and then we had to make the decision whether we go on with the show or not.
Sorry,
we did go on with the show.
What do you mean he said he wanted to die on stage? What are you talking about?
That was his goal. That's how he wanted to go. So
What?
he just didn't tell anyone he had Legionnaire's disease, and then did the show, had a mini heart attack, and then afterwards he was taken away in an ambulance. I never saw him again. And then we just did the play with somebody else on book for the last 2 shows.
Huh. Well, good for him. So, yeah, I mean, I auditioned, when I first got to the city and I didn't know what anything was. I did one audition there at Theater for the New City. One of the worst auditions I ever did. And I had handed over a headshot, not realizing that I had forgotten to staple my resume to it. So they did not have my resume. And I was
they
like,
sure had your beautiful face.
So I walked out of the theater. I was like, well, that was a wash, whatever. I've just made every possible mistake. And that I feel kind of good that I made all of them at once very early on. And then they called me back and cast me. And I was like,
how did they get your number?
No, well, I guess I wrote it down. I don't remember that part. Maybe there was a sign-in form or something.
There was like a fill-out form.
But like,
yeah.
when they did that, I was like, oh, there's no way that this is going to be worth my time.
No.
Right? If I show up like that and they're like, that's good enough.
That's our guy.
I don't want to be a part of a club that would have me as a member. So I did not do that play. So anyway, Fever of Unknown Origin is performed at Theater for the New City. There's no press for it. There's one reviewer who comes from the New York Post and doesn't publish a review. So that's why this one has dropped off even more than the other ones. The other ones you can actually find some information about, even if you can't find the script itself. So that's 1984. And so then in 1985, Circle Rep is getting ready to open As Is. And so while they're in the process of this, they find out that Larry Kramer is writing The Normal Heart, and it's going to be produced at the Public Theater a month later.
And for those of you who are not familiar with who Larry Kramer is, a longtime activist. He just died pretty recently.
Yeah,
actually.
2020. He wrote in the 70s, he wrote a rather controversial novel called Faggots.
Right.
Right.
He's generally seen, I don't think this is an entirely fair characterization of him, but he's generally seen as a sex negative
right.
Activist. And he was one of the first people to codify a lot of the information about this new disease in 81 and wrote an article saying, like, there's no way this is not happening because of sex. We have to find alternate ways of engaging with each other sexually, to which he was shouted down by a lot of people, including Robert Chesley, the author of Night Sweat.
Because also, we had mentioned a little earlier Gay Men's Health Crisis, an organization that was dedicated to helping men with AIDS and the people who loved them.
Yeah.
He was one of the co-founders of that organization.
Yes.
And that play, The Normal Heart, is sort of a fictionalization of his real life experience with a number of things, including getting ousted from leadership at GMHC.
Yeah.
And what's remarkable about The Normal Heart, we'll talk about this obviously when we cover The Normal Heart at a certain point, but like he doesn't shy away from like the uglier sides of himself,
Right, yeah.
or like the things that other people would perceive as the uglier parts of himself.
No, Larry Kramer was very good at making enemies throughout his entire life, and that play is a very good document of how he made those enemies.
Yes.
Some of them deserved, some of them undeserved. As Is, at the time, is kind of the more successful play.
Mm-hmm.
It goes to Broadway in May of that year. It gets nominated for the Tony.
Normal Heart, it gets that production at the Public, but it doesn't go anywhere after that production.
Yeah, it doesn't go higher, but it does make lateral moves. It plays in LA and San Francisco and other cities. It goes to Europe. It gets a Polish production pretty early on. It does actually play in London before As Is, but As Is gets a TV movie that plays on Showtime, translated into 11 languages. And for a time, it's kind of the bigger play, actually, for quite a number of years.
I mean, you can go and read Frank Rich's review of the Broadway production. It's an out and out rave. And he particularly was impressed with Jonathan Hogan's performance as the character of Rich, which we'll be talking about in a bit.
Yeah.
And it ended up running for almost a year, 285 performances. But if you look at sort of the below the top line number, generally speaking, the house was only between like 60 to 70% of capacity. So it must have
was pretty common for the 80s.
Yeah.
And they had the same producer's Torch Song trilogy, right? The Harvey Fierstein play that was very successful. It was successful a couple of years before, and it was doing better week over week numbers than Torch Song trilogy was. So as far as gay plays went, it was performing a little bit better than expected.
And it didn't win any Tony Awards, the Tony being sort of the most prestigious award in the American theater, but it was nominated for 3 of them.
Simon that year.
For Biloxi Blues.
Oh my
it was
God.
a wild. That was also the year of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which is one of the greatest plays
That's
ever
crazy.
fucking written.
Ridiculous year.
It was a wild year at the
The
Tonys.
80s were a rough time for theater, due in part to the fact that so many people were, of course, dying.
Did you also just want to note the 3 Tony Awards that it got nominated for? Best Play, Best Actor, and that was for Jonathan Hogan as Rich, as well as Best Direction for Marshall W. Mason, who would actually go on to direct Larry Kramer's The Destiny of Me, which is the sequel to The Normal Heart.
And The Destiny of Me was done by Circle Repertory Theater, and so a lot of the people in the cast, like Jonathan Hadary, who played Saul in As Is, played The Destiny of Me. that and arguably the sequel to The Normal Heart at the time was a bigger play than The Normal Heart. But both of these plays become like, I don't know, academic canon. They're always done in colleges throughout the 90s. As is still, and you told me this, AJ, because I didn't, go to a normal theater school. As is still like a regular acting class staple.
Oh, absolutely. This first scene in particular is used all the time in acting classes. And I saw two goys do this scene to each other, and I'm like, this is not okay. But one of them was Italian, so the accord stands.
Yeah, that's fine. That's why you're going to be Saul here for this, this episode.
I imagined that was the case.
I did this play in 2018 at the Workshop Theater.
I didn't know that.
So yeah, I did that play, a couple of years before COVID started. And
wow,
it really made an impression on me. And that's, I guess, why I even knew about this play. Because The Normal Heart in recent years, I think a lot of the things that made it unappealing to people when it was fresh, when it was about people who were alive and in the audience watching the play about them.
Yeah.
Now that it's a piece of history, The Normal Heart has a very strong legacy because it's so educational as to what was happening. Whereas As Is sort of takes it as a given. It allows you into this world that is, in 1985, the same world that you're walking out into once you leave the theater. So The Normal Heart kind of sets the stage a little bit more, and of course gets a Broadway production finally in 2011, and then a Ryan Murphy TV movie. And As Is has kind of disappeared. And I think in part because it's kind of hard to index, like it's a hard thing to search for because the title is As Is.
It's a horrendously awful title
it's
for
not
SEO
search engine
reasons.
optimized.
Yeah.
William was not thinking about
Why
the
was he
internet
not
when he wrote
thinking
it. I don't
about
know.
how it would do on Google? That's what I want to know.
Content, William. Content.
So Bill Hoffman, mostly known, the most famous work that he did was for the soap opera One Life to Live in the 90s. And also a Met Opera commission for an opera called The Ghosts of Versailles. He wrote the libretto for that. That was commissioned in 1980, supposed to come out for the Met's 100th in 1983, and then came out in 1991.
Oh, wow.
Whoa. Okay.
It was filmed, but I, from what I understand, it's not a widely produced opera. But, he made a good name for himself. And I think this play, I personally think this play is a masterpiece. I think he writes for the theater. He writes for the theater as a form in a way that I understand, and a way that I think other playwrights don't really exploit in the way that he does so cannily.
And you're going to hear this when we read some sections, but one thing that I really loved about reading this was just how I could picture all of the different ways it could look. I think so much of the writing gives itself over to many, many dynamic staging opportunities. And because I'm always thinking about this plays as like, how would I direct this? Reading it on the page, you don't really get a sense of how it would look. And for me, that's very exciting.
Yeah. You can tell he's a director. You can tell that he's like, I can hand this to someone and they can turn this into something.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. And while I think a lot of other AIDS-related plays, right, Angels in America, The Inheritance, I think most recently, falsettos, I guess, to a certain extent, even though I think falsettos falls closer to As Is than it does certainly like an Angels or a Rent, right? But they tend to be very plot focused, right? We tend to be navigating like the build up to the disease, the getting of the disease, and then like sort of going out from there.
Absolutely.
So As Is a much more vignette based play. We follow Saul and Rich throughout the whole thing, but we still can like take time to go into other avenues. In fact, the play doesn't even start with Saul and Rich. We open with a hospice worker.
Right.
Who gives a monologue and acts as sort of the bookends to the play.
Yeah, this hospice worker is a very like 20th century kind of Brecht style device. You also see this with like the common man in A Man for All Seasons, to think of another like English language play.
Yeah, the utility of this character is to welcome you in and sort of set what the rules of the world are by being like, hello, I am this character. I do this thing. This is the world that you are about to see unfold before you.
And she's not really even talking about AIDS at the beginning.
Just about death.
Just about death, right? The concept of death. And she's also a little vaudeville. She has corny jokes that she tells.
My job is to ease the way for those who are dying. I've done this for the last couple of years. I work mostly here at St. Vincent's. During the day, I have a boring secretarial job, which helps me support my career as a saint. I was much more idealistic when I started. I had just left the convent. I guess I thought that working with the dying would give me spiritual gold stars. I thought I'd be able to impart my great wisdom to those in need of improvement. I wanted to bear witness to dramatic deathbed conversions, see shafts of light emanating from heaven, multicolored auras hanging over the head of those in the process of expiring. I always imagined they would go out expressing their gratitude for all that I had done. Quick joke. Did you hear the one about the man who lost his left side? He's all right now. All right now. We tell a lot of jokes in my line of work.
And then we jump right into the first scene. Yeah. What I love about that opening stage direction is that it's a dowdy middle-aged woman wearing a dark dress and bright lipstick and nail polish. So that's the whole play. It's shrouded in death. It is this dark dress, but it is fighting that with bright lipstick and nail polish, which ends up being sort of the punchline of the whole play. We just don't know that quite yet.
Right. She is chorus, right? Like you get in Romeo and Juliet. She bookends this thing, but also provides kind of the middle. There's a hospice ex-nun sandwich.
Yes. And with a layer of nun in between.
Yeah. I guess you don't name the sandwich after the bread, but I'm doing it.
I love a good rye sandwich. I don't know what you're talking about.
I usually take the nun out of my sandwich. It's not for me personally, but you know, it's up if you like it.
Well, that's none your business.
True.
Okay. Yeah. So the hospice worker brings us into this next moment. There are no scene changes in this play. Everything flows from one moment to the next. And if you have a lot of tech, like if you're on Broadway, you can have, moving floors and things like that to slide people in and out, or you're just very dependent on your actors. Your actors have to bring each piece of scenery or piece of mental scenery on with them. So we now find ourselves with two gay men going through their divorce proceedings, basically.
Yes, they're dividing the estate.
They start this conversation figuring out who gets custody of the cat. And you can tell that...
Just cut her in half.
You can tell that they're not... they're talking past each other. The two men here are Rich and Saul. Saul is Jewish, Rich is Christian. We'll see that show up again in The Normal Heart and in... Angels in America.
Angels in America.
This is bad. Like things are really sour between these two people, and everything just sets them off. And especially Rich. Rich is a shouty kind of guy.
And what I find so fascinating about this first scene is how there could be like moments where they go off on tangents about certain characters, but everything is clipped and to the point.
Yeah, we learn a lot. There's someone named Chet, so obviously he left Saul for Chet, right? Like, Rich just wants to get rid of all the furniture. He doesn't give a shit about like, okay, you own this, I own this. He's like, we just get rid of it all and we split the money. And then there's this chair and he's like, well, the chair's mine.
But that's the reason things keep moving, right? Is they want to get through this as quickly as they can.
Well, Rich does. I would argue that Saul's whole thing is I need to keep this guy here as long as possible because then I can remind him of the good times and then we can get
Saul
back
needs
together.
Because Saul is not over Rich yet.
Absolutely not.
No. And never will be because Saul is a good boy.
So this is where we come in and we're going to read a little bit of this first scene here. I'm going to be Rich. AJ's going to be Saul.
In accordance with the accord.
In accordance with the accord. I won't be wanting the copper pots.
Why not? When you and Chet move to your space, you'll want to cook again.
I just don't want them. People change. I'm eating out a lot.
Oh, Chet can't cook?
You keep the rowing machine
Have you lost weight?
and the trampoline.
There's some Black Forest cake in the fridge.
Stop it.
Stop what?
Just stop.
I can't.
We're almost through.
I have feelings.
You have only one feeling.
He won't make you
Oh,
happy.
here we go again.
Don't.
Keep everything.
I visited Teddy today at St. Vincent's. It's very depressing. He's lying there in bed, out of it. He's been out of it since the time we saw him. He's not in any pain, snorting his imaginary cocaine, doing his poppers. Sometimes he's washing his mother's floor and he's speaking to her in Spanish. Sometimes he's having sex. You can see him having sex right in front of you. He doesn't even know you're there. Harry has KS and Matt has the swollen glands. He went in for tests today. I haven't slept well for weeks. Every morning I examine my body for swellings, marks. I'm terrified of every pimple, every rash. If I cough, I think of Teddy. I wish he would die. He is dead. He might as well be. Why can't he die? I feel the disease closing in on me. All my activities are life and death. Keep up my Blue Cross, up my reps, eat my vegetables. Sometimes I'm so scared I go back to my resolutions. I drink too much. I smoke a joint. I find myself at the bars and clubs where I stand around and watch. They remind me of accounts of Europe during the Black Plague. Coupling in the dark, dancing till you drop. The new wave is the corpse look. I'm very frightened and I miss you. Say something, damn it!
I have it.
You what?
You have what?
He has AIDS.
I don't think that's funny.
The idea is ridiculous.
That's the bad news.
You ran the
Darling.
goddamn marathon.
The good news is that I only have the swollen glands.
We call it a pre-AIDS condition.
AIDS-related complex.
And I've lost some weight.
I'm in a state of shock.
Move in with me.
I tire
Chet
easily.
doesn't
My
know how to take
temperature
care
goes
of
up
you.
and
Your
down.
suppressor cells outnumber your helper cells.
I don't care what he has, Betty. He's my brother.
You're my lover.
You're my buddy.
Rich and I started the business about a year ago, but now word got out that Rich has this disease. I tried to explain.
I'm
he
not
doesn't
in
touch
the habit
food.
of kissing
I
my
do all the
brother.
cooking,
I
but they
touched
won't
him
listen.
on the back when I arrived and when I left.
Why would they? I wonder if I'd use a caterer who had AIDS.
That moment that Rich says I have it, the entire stage explodes with people. And as you can hear, it's people, most of them talking to Rich, some of them talking about Rich. And the way that we played, I played Rich back in 2018. The way that we did it was like, I'm hearing everything that they're saying. This is the stuff running through my head. If they're talking about me, these are conversations happening simultaneously with my meeting with Saul. If they're talking to me, of course, Saul is the last person Rich tells.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Everybody
that
else
fucking
knows
sucks.
before him. His brother knows. And this scene continues to go on even further. And you have these sort of repeated and simultaneous lines. The chorus comes together to say certain things at the same time, like paranoid. You're feeling paranoid. To other people saying, we don't know. We don't know. We don't know. That's kind of how this section ends. And then also one point where Chet is walking out on Rich, which is why Rich is here with Saul. He doesn't have anyone. He doesn't have any money. He doesn't have any insurance. And he reaches for Chet, and Chet and his brother and his partner and his doctor all shout, "Don't touch me."
This is something that if you can dial it in is so ridiculously effective.
Well, that's because it's very emotional writing, right? It's not logical writing. It is, we're going to get you to feel how it feels to have been diagnosed with AIDS in the best way that theater can, which is to just throw way too much information at you. I mean, it's like, I guess it's no different than like any like terminal medical diagnosis, right? We are going to get you into the mindset of someone who's just having all this information thrown at them at once, and it's overwhelming, and you're trying to keep track of like, okay, who's who, because you're having all these conversations with people telling them all these things, and they're all basically kind of the same thing, right? And they all end the same way, particularly for Rich, which is, do not touch me, because of this horrific fear around the disease.
And the reason why this works on stage is because of the contradiction of it. These people are in different places, but they're also literally in the same place.
Right.
Rich can go from talking to Saul to talking to Chet instantaneously. You can do whatever you want with that actor. So when this was made into a TV movie, there were some choices there that don't work, but also I don't know what you could do You can hear it in this podcast. It's like, well, I don't know who these people are, right? On stage, you can see them standing there talking, especially in a small theater. But you're listening to a podcast, you're watching a movie. These people are all separate. The movie is done very literally. Everyone is in a different place. It cuts very evenly and neatly to the next line and then cuts back to the apartment. You kind of see time passing. It's a little disorienting. The music does a little bit of work, but it just doesn't have the effect that it has on stage.
No, well, you need the pace, right?
Exactly. Everything has to be happening at once. And the fact that in this moment, all of these people have just suddenly appeared on stage and are surrounding Rich, that's the point. You're not supposed to know who they are yet.
Yeah. But you're at least supposed to be able to tell them apart. I think that part is important.
From each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that the main thing that probably would have fixed a lot of the TV movies problems for me is if there was motion with when Rich moved. Like if he moved and then we would cut to something else, it would be constantly him like turning different parts of the room maybe. Or honestly, just put all those actors in Saul's apartment, but make it clear with lighting that this is unreality.
That's another,
right.
Like try to bring some of the stage to it.
But there's just these gargantuan pauses between every single line, and it loses the magic.
It's not a terrible movie, but it is
it's not.
a lot of lost potential. We drift out of this crowd scene back into the conversation between Saul and Rich. There has been a scene change, not in a literal sense because it's a moment later, but in an emotional sense. Now the scene is about something different.
Right.
This is about Saul in a world that is totally different than it was before Rich said 3 little words to him, and is now saying, well, now it's obvious what's going on here. You have to stay with me. You don't have anywhere else to go. Yeah. And Rich is now doing everything that he can to alienate Saul. Rich is not at any point in this play a very attractive person, which is one of the things I really admire about it. One of the things that's really fun to play about it is because you're giving into all of your worst impulses. You're not a saint. You're not going to go quietly. And in a way that like future versions of this, future AIDS plays go on to sort of sanctify the person with AIDS.
Yeah, I mean, Angels does it very literally.
That's true.
Prior Walter is a fucking prophet, and like he's sarcastic and witty and like has like barbs to him. But like he is ultimately like a very good person.
Yeah.
Angels takes the conceit of As Is and flips it on its head, right? What if Saul, instead of saying you have to stay with me and being this caregiver,
because Saul is the saint here.
Yeah, Saul is the saint, the caregiver.
Sometimes these plays, Normal Heart as well, get kind of criticized for this, but it's like people did this. This is real.
Oh yeah,
this is a real thing. There were people who died who were saints, and there were caretakers who had broken up with their former lovers who were also saints in all of this.
Here's the other thing that I'll say to that critique as well. That like, oh, it's just very cliche to show this guy suddenly turning his whole life around to stay attentive to this other guy. It's like, yeah, because he's afraid of losing him.
Yeah.
Like this is oftentimes what happens. Like if everything is reasonably secure and you have a stable relationship, even a previous stable relationship that has fallen apart, right? It was once stable and it no longer is. Now it's gone. Yeah, you might move on.
Yeah.
But in a situation where you feel a strong sense that that person will not be able to make it without you for what limited period of time they have left, oh, you're going to be sticking by that motherfucker. No doubt about it.
And there's something about control for Saul, and we'll see that later. We see that Saul kind of has this need to be the one with everything, and needs someone who's dependent on him.
Right.
And that has a negative characteristic to it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this play actually, I would argue for all the critiques that it gets about the saintness of Saul, like no one in this play comes out looking great.
They come out looking human, you know?
Yeah.
They come out fully recognizable as people. But yet Tony Kushner took this to a different degree, because anything that happens twice in 2 plays that come out a month apart from each other and both have this seismic impact, it becomes the genre now, right? Before, an AIDS play could be a number of different things. It could be a simple monologue. It could be about the nightclub that kills you instantly. But now it's like, oh, well, there's always going to be a breakup. There's always going to be a Christian and a Jew. There's always going to be like this question. So Tony Kushner has to subvert it. When he reveals the character that has AIDS, it's almost tossed off, right? He rolls up his sleeve. You see the Kaposi sarcoma, and he's like, yeah, it's looking a little worse than it was. And then Lewis runs off. He's the opposite of a saint, you know?
He goes to have sex with a Mormon boy.
Yeah, which is also like, that's a fair thing to depict. There's nothing against Tony Kushner for depicting that as well. I just sometimes see people when they list this as like a criticism of something like As Is, I'm like, I don't get that, because this is a play that is born of, and we'll see more of this later, of research and of lived experience. William Hoffman just going to support group meetings and talking to people and his own friends.
Rich now has told Saul that he has AIDS, and he's experiencing mild symptoms right now, just like some swelling in the glands in his neck. But Saul immediately is like, okay, buddy, like you're moving in with me now.
Rich says, aren't you afraid that I'll infect you? And Saul says, yes, I'm afraid.
This obviously drives Rich to try and drive him away even more.
Rich
right?
starts talking about, well, I've been going out and I've been picking up guys.
And not telling them.
No, especially for the purposes of not telling them. I mean, he's saying, I know this is a bad thing. I am doing the worst thing I can imagine.
It's also, I think, as written, it's hard to know how much of this is true versus him just saying it for the sake of trying to shock Saul.
I feel by the end of this sequence, again, this is a play about feeling, and it's about the feeling that comes forth rather than necessarily the textual information. He's lying.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have the stones to do it. And we have one point where he starts to like tell someone, and he gets very straightforward about it, right? He's like, oh, my lymph nodes are swollen. It's because I have AIDS. And the guy's like, well, damn, fuck.
No,
I'm not going home with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then there's one guy who he talks to who is like, they're actually bonding on an intellectual level. And it's like, hey, let's actually go out. And he's like, I have to tell you something. He's like, oh, you have a boyfriend.
Yeah.
And
he's like,
I
have a boyfriend.
That's it.
Yeah, because either way, he strikes out there, but at least he doesn't have to tell someone that he has AIDS, right? He's willing to accept
that. Yeah.
That line is interesting where that guy's like, oh, we could go, this line gets rewritten. When I did it, which I think would probably be the dramatist's version of the script, the licensed version that's available now, maybe it was rewritten a couple years later, they talk about going to an Everett Quinton play. In this version that we have, the hardcover that was published, he says Charles Ludlam. And in the other one that mentions Everett Quinton, they also talk about maybe going to a Mapplethorpe exhibit. Right. So maybe stuff that's just a little bit more recognizable about New York, but Everett Quinton is quite a drop. That was a Village director.
I don't even know who that guy is.
I've met Everett Quinton. So
really?
The lady who played the hospice nurse.
Right here.
No, he passed away a couple years ago, but the lady who played the hospice nurse when we did As Is, she knew Everett Quinton. And so I got to meet him.
Did he come to the show?
I don't remember if I met him later. I don't think he did come to the show. I met him because she was doing a production of Much Ado About Nothing at St. John's. That Everett was directing, and so I got to meet him and hear him talk about Bill Hoffman a little bit because they were friends. He was writing his friend's name into this thing, including like the artwork. You know, the stuff that they're arguing over is all like stuff drawn by like people Bill Hoffman knew, and you know, because so much of this play, this is about people with money. All these plays are about people with money,
right?
And these are about the people who live in the village, right? Yep. And there's like West Village gay culture and East Village gay culture. These are all different things.
And to be clear, the village then certainly was not what the village is now. But
no, it wasn't. But still, like on its way there, right? This was moving on from the 70s.
Yeah, think Williamsburg 15 years ago. Maybe.
Yeah, I did clean up for like an apartment for a guy who owned a brownstone in the village. This is one of the odd jobs that I had, and he had bought that entire building in 1976 for, I think it was less than $100,000.
Fuck you.
It's across the street from Samantha's house on Sex and the City. That house is like chained off and tour groups go by it every day. And like the apartment that I was cleaning up, which is a whole floor of the building, was renting for, I think, $12,000 a month.
Jesus
in 2018.
Well, here's the thing about living in New York City for people who don't live in New York.
Yeah.
Living in New York City over the course of decades, which is what I'm approaching. And Jesus Christ, I hate to think about that. But it is an experience of walking past buildings that you were inside of once and will never be inside of again.
Mm-hmm. And there was sort of an upper middle class character to the characters in this play, whereas now this is living in this place would be unattainable.
But what's also interesting, too, about the characters in this play is that, I guess you could say they're upper middle class. They're in the creative professions, right?
Yeah.
Saul's a photographer.
Yeah.
But it's clear that because of the positionality that they occupy right now, that if they make it, if they survive, they will continue to be upwardly mobile.
Yes.
That the paintings that they own are going to become fantastically valuable in the future.
Yeah.
And the play, obviously, being something that was written contemporaneously, it has no way of truly knowing that this will be the case. But I think it understands that it is a likelihood that it will.
Yeah. Well, it's just owning real estate at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It will only increase in value, particularly that this takes place in what they describe as a stereotypical photographer's loft in the village. Right. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, we don't have those anymore.
Yeah, it's so different. But like, gay people were in the village, right? Christopher Street is in the village. The stone wall is where it is for a reason.
Gay Street is in the village.
It's true.
The gayest of all streets.
And St. Vincent's is in the village, right? This is the hospital that treated so many of the people suffering from AIDS. There's now that, I don't know if you've ever been to the memorial out there at St. Vincent's
haunting
Triangle.
and beautiful.
Not only have I been past it, I went past it on one of the days when they were, because they do this every year, they read all the names of people who have died of AIDS out loud, every single one. They just hold vigil and don't stop until they've read every name.
When I was working on this play, it was January, but I went there all the time and I just sat there and read, there's text from Walt Whitman on the ground there. And it's designed so that as the sun is passing over, there are these shadows that it casts that change. It's a very beautiful place. So as Rick is picking these people up, because this play is already like, oh yeah, we're flowing from one place to the next, from one person to the next, we have these two flashbacks to Rich trying to pick people up at the bar. The second flashback is a Trojan horse, though. It's a flash forward. We have had a time skip.
Right.
It turns out after this meeting with Saul, Rich just ran off for 2 more weeks. And so we see him at a bar with 2 clones. That's another great little bit of setting this thing, and the time that it's set is like clones. That term doesn't even really come up anymore. Maybe in San Francisco still. Do you guys know what clones are?
It's the leather daddies, right? With the hats?
Yeah. So they were called Castro clones. It was about the guys who dressed up a certain way in the Castro.
Yeah.
And it's like the Tom of Finland archetype. It's the leather hat. It's the harness. It's the big mustache, that kind of stuff. Yeah, the chaps.
The aviator glasses.
And so
it's the music video for Life at the Outpost.
Rich is so out of his element here. He walks up to one of the clones and he's like, hey, I'm an interesting guy. And then he's getting increasingly drunk and he's trying to like butch it up and he's drinking like Heineken, no ice.
It's really good. Both Rich and Saul are kind of queenie, which I really like.
I mean, they're basically the kinds of people who become playwrights.
But I think the big difference between them that I notice, at least as regards their external presentation, is that Saul is broadly speaking pretty comfortable with who he is.
Yeah.
Whereas Rich kind of wishes that he was something that he is not and never will be.
Yeah, I think he kind of wishes that he was Saul. I think he kind of wishes that he was Jewish, right? He always brings up this Jewish thing with Saul, and it's so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then he talks about later, like Saul's like, you don't have to go to any Passover Seders, anything. And Rich is like, I like the Passovers. I like your dad. And Saul's like, well, great. At least he likes you. I'm glad he likes me. I'm glad he likes one of us. Like,
because Saul has this wit, right?
Yeah.
He has this ability to turn things around on a dime and be very clever and charming. Whereas whenever Rich tries to do that, it's always just really like mean or awkward or uncomfortable or offensive.
And so when he goes to the bar this second time, he tries to pick up this clone. The clone is nothing, doesn't care. And he goes off with this other guy and they're negotiating their kinks. And Rich is reciting poetry here in this bar. And there's interesting ways that these things sort of line up where like the clone says water sports and then knocks over a beer and the beer spills all over Rich and Rich loses his mind in this section. And Rich is absolutely wasted here.
Hey, asshole! Hey! I'll kill you, faggot!
He's been drinking.
Get that jerk out of here. Oh, what's the matter? You can't fight like a man?
Rich.
Fuck all that shit.
Come on, keep moving.
I'm a very bad person.
You're an asshole.
I wanted to go to bed with that guy.
I practically beg you to move in with me.
I wasn't going to tell him about me or anything.
And what do?
But you want to know something?
You disappear for 2 weeks?
I wouldn't do that. I would never do that.
I almost called the cops.
You believe me?
Believe what?
I never would ever do that.
Do you remember the one about the Polish lesbian?
Never.
She liked men.
You asshole.
You schmuck.
You prick.
God, I miss talking dirty.
Talking dirty makes it feel like spring. Suck my dick, faggot.
Kiss my ass, cocksucker.
Sit on it, punk.
Lick boot, fruit. I love that fucking
So
line.
good.
I don't know what the fuck
scene
to
is
tell
so
you.
great. I mean,
It's so good.
something you don't get a chance of with plays usually is a scene where people are happy. You get this more in movies. You don't get this with plays, because
Sure.
movies can have really short scenes. Then you're like, haha, here's the happy guy and here's how we're going to knock him down. And this scene is them going back over the last 10 years and talking about all the crazy shit that they did. It's, you know, I think sometimes people characterize As Is as kind of a sanitized play, but it's not textually true.
Well, I was going to say, you don't get lines like that in a sanitized play.
It's sentimental, but it's one that is fully immersed in gay culture at the time.
I to that point, I wanted to just read a brief bit from the foreword that Hoffman writes that sort of reflects this. Because he writes in the foreword about how the play just wasn't coming together up until he allowed it the opportunity to be fun and to be funny. I was having dinner with my friend Constance Mary O'Toole, who is a hospice worker at St. Vincent's Hospital in Greenwich Village in the heart of New York's gay community, when it finally dawned on me that maybe humor was a key to my play. She said, "We tell a lot of jokes in my line of work. I also began to realize that among the people with AIDS that I was meeting, those with a sense of humor were doing better than those without. I permitted the play to be funny. I found that audiences at the Circle Repertory Company, where I was workshopping sections of the piece as I wrote them, responded to the humor.
Yeah.
It enabled them, and I think this is really important here, it enabled them to accept the pain of the sadder material."
Yeah. This whole scene goes into like, even when they're going to have casual sex with people, like the weird annoyances that happen like in line for the glory hole. And like, it's just so funny and catty. And then Rich has all of these like high-minded ideas of the free sex. It's not promiscuous. It's non-directive. It's non-committed, non-authoritarian sex. I don't know why you would ever want to have non-authoritarian sex, but that's just me. So
lick boot, fruit. I'm hearing this for the first time.
Like this moment allows them to exist, like truly exist in the past. This scene is not about the sadness at all. And to think about this is not a didactic play in the way the normal heart is, or the way that one might be. However, if your intention is to make a play that gay people are going to and straight people are going to, who might not know anything about AIDS, who might know everything about AIDS, this is a very clever bit of education about how gay relationships often work as non-monogamous things, you know, as things where like, oh, we're both going to go have sex with somebody. Or
and
maybe we're
there's no
together, I
shame
leave the house,
about
I do this. And it's something that's just pretty deeply ingrained. And people might not understand. They might just think, oh yeah, you know, allies might think like, oh, a gay person is just like a straight person, except they're gay. Right? No other thing. It's just like, okay, maybe everyone's just as monogamous as I am as a straight person. Because all straight people are monogamous and all gay people are not monogamous. Yeah,
that is exactly how it is. Yeah. And that's the important thing that I think we all need to take away from this episode.
Stay in your lane.
You find the right flag and you never veer from anything that is contradictory to what it says.
That's right.
I swear to God, I will find you.
This is turning into some very authoritarian sex right now. So I feel like...
So yeah, Rich and Saul, they start talking about their life together. And we get the first little bit of like why Rich left, which is that it sounds very nice to me, but it's boring to Rich, right? They got into their routine. They had their pork chops, their French fries. They'd watch Mission Impossible and Star Trek every night.
I'm sure that Mission Impossible and Star Trek every night sounded very appealing to you, Brian.
Who doesn't love Leonard Nimoy?
But it's so funny, like reading this now and being like, yeah, I mean, you don't even have to change the references.
Yeah.
That's just something you can do now.
Yeah, now it's just a different Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
It's still the same Star Trek, though.
Same Star Trek. They're not watching new Trek.
No.
Then we have one more flash here. This is not a flashback. This is not a flash forward. This isn't something that includes Saul or Rich. This is a flash off to other people. This is very, I feel, Brechtian. This is very
flash sideways, perhaps?
This feels to me like something just broke.
It does,
Assassins.
and it predates something just broke by nearly 20 years.
And again, you read this, and it is such a foundational text for so many other works by queer artists going forward that it is a shame that is not talked about more.
Yeah.
Because you read this, and you're like, yeah, that's where something just broke came from. It has to be
and
this.
It recalls as well us talking about the beginning of COVID. So let's just get into this. It starts with Saul, and he's had this long monologue about like, there's a Breaking Bad monologue that kind of reminds me of this, is like their happiest moment, where he's talking about like being out on the beach and his mom is lying on their blanket and his aunt is asleep and like everything is just so peaceful. And
he calls breasts bazooms,
yes,
which
he
I think
says,
is so
or
funny.
bazooms. And then it gets very real. And so this section begins with the very last part of Saul's monologue.
I was at the St. Mark's Bath soaking in the hot tub when I first heard about AIDS. And it was 4 years ago. My friend Brian, remember him? Was soaking too, and he told me about a mutual friend who had died the week before. It was bizarre, he said.
The first time I heard about AIDS, it was a spring day. Kind of warm. I was wearing a jacket.
The first time I heard about AIDS was
I remember
in the Paradise
I ran
Garage,
into a friend on the corner of 57th and Broadway.
a disco that I used to go to.
He asked me if I had heard about Joel.
I won a raffle, and the proceeds of
I
which
thought
went to
AIDS
help
was
people
like
with the strange new
Legionnaire's
disease.
or toxic shock syndrome or sickle cell anemia or Alzheimer's disease.
I didn't even know what it was.
One of those rare diseases you read about in the papers.
It didn't make any sense to me.
The first time I heard about
The
it
phone
was the
rang.
doctor calling
Right
me.
before he hung up, he said,
So, you know he has AIDS.
that's the first time I heard the word.
I was backstage at Saratoga.
I can't
Can't
remember if it was the seagull.
Or Virginia Woolf.
Yeah, it's just a great scene. It's just like he has set up these rules for how things are going to happen on this stage, and then he makes another iteration. Now we don't even need Rich and Saul to anchor us anymore. Now we're putting the people in the audience up on the stage.
Yeah, and the fact that it comes in the middle of Saul's monologue, and when we come back, Saul is still giving that same monologue. It was just like, it takes this very personal story of these two men, and then in the middle of telling that personal story, it zooms out, and it's like, this is the conversation that's been had by so many other people.
This is so masterful, too, because it still keeps it personal. I mean, I am a big defender of The Normal Heart, and I can't wait for us to talk about that play at some point. But one of the things that it's not quite as good at as is that it doesn't personalize everybody's struggle in the same way.
Yeah.
No, the
Larry
most effective
Kramer's
parts of The Normal Heart, I think, do really well. Milk scene, I'm thinking of in particular.
And then, like, so for when it comes to Larry Kramer's story and the character of Ned, who's like the stand-in for him, right?
Yeah.
You get a sense of what it means to him.
Yeah.
But when it comes to everybody else, you're mostly hearing about it through statistics and articles from the New York Times and stuff like that, which is very good and very important, but it doesn't give you the same feeling.
This one is not concerned with statistics. It's not concerned as much. It tells you a little bit about the progression of the disease. Nothing as detailed as The Normal Heart. It doesn't tell you who to be mad at. Right. This is why this is why The Normal Heart is so important. It tells you who you should be mad at.
And that is specifically the goddamn motherfucking New York Times.
The goddamn motherfucking New York Times and the goddamn motherfucking mayor of New York and Ronald Reagan and all of his cronies and all of these nasty motherfuckers. This play is not about that. It's so lucky that these two plays had each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because where one is missing something, the other has it.
They really do support each other. And yet it is very interesting that when William Hoffman talks about As Is. He talks about the normal heart all the time.
Yeah, he does.
Larry Kramer barely mentions As Is.
Yeah.
If at all.
I mean,
that's not surprising.
That's not surprising.
It's not
at
surprising at all. But I do think it's interesting that even I've been trying to find some quote from Tony Kushner about As Is as well.
Because he's obviously taking so much from this play.
Well, yeah,
riffing on
and
it.
before we were recording, AJ, you read me the quote being like, I think this might be about As Is, but it's like, it's just what's been written, at least what we've been able to find, just isn't precise enough to be like, yeah, that definitely is As Is, or that definitely could even be As Is, in my opinion.
I think Kushner's genius is that he merges the two sensibilities together. He creates one play where Larry Kramer and William Hoffman created two separate ones. And then, I guess
Tony
Kushner
Kushner also made two plays. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, Larry Kramer actually made 2 plays as well. So
yes.
That's the other.
Big deal. I made 3.
Well, and I think, because I think that, and I mean, this will be when we talk about Angels in America, but I think that Angels in America is very unkind to Larry Kramer in particular, specifically through the lens of Prior Walter and his character in Perestroika, who is dressed like Larry fucking Kramer, right? Who's like wearing the black robe and walking around and speaking of doom and gloom. And Tony Kushner is saying this is an inherently reactionary right-wing man with an inherently reactionary right-wing opinion that cannot be carried forward through time. And I think he's fundamentally wrong about that. And I'm talking about 2 plays that are not the play that we're talking about this week. And I knew this was going to happen because this is this fucking burns in my chest all the time. And once we have all these episodes together, you can bounce between them, but you're going to have to wait for now.
It's going to be kind of like watching As Is.
Yes.
You'll just go between the episodes at
We're
will.
going to interrupt one monologue to jump in to talk about 2 other plays, and then we're going to go back to the monologue. Oh, God, is this a podcast? Is this play just a podcast?
What is this? A leather bar?
I'm always asking this.
We were actually at a leather bar.
We were finally at a leather
And I didn't
bar.
even mention
We
it.
had our answer.
I blew it.
Now that we have finally figured out what this is, I feel like this is probably a pretty good time for us to take our break, yeah?
Yeah, so Saul has gotten Rich to move back in. He does so by being mean to him. He's like, fine, just stay at the house, but when I have visitors over, you can't leave your room and shit like that.
That's right.
When he that's finally able to get Rich to feel like he's not, I don't know, a charity
Rich
case.
is a brat, and sometimes you need a brat tamer, you know?
And so Rich moves in, and this play does not have a break. It's not long enough to be a 2-act play, but our podcast is long. So we're going to take a break and refill our water and come back and talk about the second half of As Is.
This week's episode is brought to you by Writer's Block. Fuck! So Chess the Musical is being revived.
Yeah, heard about this.
And it has a new book by Danny Strong.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer's own Danny Strong?
I believe so, actually.
He wrote Game Change.
And apparently the big thing that they're adding to it is a bunch of PowerPoint presentations that explain what was going on between America and the U.S.
Come on, really?
America and the USSR.
America and the U.S.?
Yeah,
Okay, great.
America and the U.S. What was going on
It's
between
the
America?
U.S. versus U.S.
It's a lot more of like actors stepping forward and being like, the U.S. was at war, and here's what the Cold War was, and here's what, the stakes were, and here's who was in office at the time. It's like chess has now become like a museum piece.
But which one? Is it a pawn? Is it a rook?
Okay.
Is it a bishop? Is it a knight?
How many
is
more?
Is it a king? Or
Yeah.
is it a queen?
It's
Those
definitely
are the
one
options.
of those. Those are all of them.
I'm going to make a new piece.
Oh, yeah?
His name's Brad.
He's just a guy on the corner of the board.
He's collecting unemployment, but he does have some usable skills.
Yeah, he's floating on vibes right now.
He listens to the Joe Rogan Experience a lot, which is not a plus, but
But the whole thing about this chess revival and how we now have to put context around stuff that was contextless back in the 80s made me think of As Is in comparison to the Normal Heart.
Yeah.
Because the Normal Heart, in its time, went out of its way to sort of explain itself and thus has become, I think, a better teaching tool about the time period and about the stuff that was happening with the AIDS epidemic. Whereas As Is like original chess, where it's just like it takes its blues as read. It takes everything as is.
it's really quite a title. I don't hate the title on principle, but the more we talk about the show, the more I'm like, it's really annoying to have to say stuff like whereas as is.
But okay,
whereas as is something.
But like, what's the other title for this play? Rich's No Good AIDS Adventure?
There's a lot of different things you can do for a title.
No. That's the one.
We flash back now. We get a scene that, what's interesting is a lot of these scenes, a lot of these kinds of flashbacks, a lot of the information that we get about Saul and Rich's relationship is stuff that we don't necessarily need. And yet it colors it all so well because he's just such a fucking efficient writer. He's able to throw in all of these extra details because what this scene is at its heart is Rich meeting Chet. And you can see this moment, this is trouble. This is going to destroy this relationship between Rich and Saul. He's going to run off with Chet. So there's this friend named Lily. She has been largely anonymous up until this point. She shows up in that first scene of everyone talking. You know, she says, "You're my buddy." We don't know anything about her, but now we see Rich and Saul. They're hanging out. Rich's book, which has been mentioned before, Rich's book has just been picked up. You can tell Rich has not been very successful up until this point, and Saul has. Saul's a photographer.
Right.
He's been getting his work. He's doing headshots in this particular scene, which he doesn't love. He says he loves it sarcastically, but you can see that Saul is like not comfortable with Rich's success.
Yeah.
Like what we saw before is like, oh, Rich didn't like the routine. That's a part of why he left Saul. But Saul is like weirdly shitty about this whole thing. So we're going to read an excerpt from this scene now.
Oh, no. Gee, Rich, I'm so proud of you.
Gee, Rich, I'm so proud of you.
Finally have some good news, and he's annoyed.
What should I do with this?
Well, your brother called while you're out guzzling lunch with your agent, Dr. Mangala. Call him back.
What did he have to say?
Call him and ask him. I'm not your secretary.
I'm not your secretary.
He forgot my fucking name again. How long we been together?
Too long. Forget my brother. It's my first fucking book. Let's celebrate.
You celebrate.
I'll throw a party.
Well, you serve organic cabbage juice.
His brother's a scumbag.
He likes you too.
You want this?
Thanks, Chuck.
Chet.
You're such a lush.
Whatever happened to my old drinking buddy?
Did you know they have gay AA meetings?
It's great news, babes. Really.
You really don't give a fuck.
Just how many copies you think a book of fairy tales will sell?
I picked a fine day to have my picture taken.
If you only knew how much I love doing headshots.
Fuck it. I guess I'm just being childish.
Hey, I shouldn't have said that. I'm thoughtless.
And I'm sneezy. No, really, I'm selfish. But I want that role so bad. I play the ghost of Marie Antoinette.
This scene has a lot of overlapping dialogue after this point where it's overlapping dialogue in the same room rather than in different rooms, where Lily is getting her headshot taken on one side and Rich is meeting Chet, getting to know Chet, finding an apartment for Chet on the other side. And Lily, who is played by the actress Lily Knight, she's playing herself here. This is like a little like joke.
Lovely.
It's like, okay, Lily as Lily. And the play that she is describing, that she has this audition for, that she needs her headshots ASAP, she's describing Ghosts of Versailles, which at this point is 2 years late and still won't come out. And it's not a play, it's an opera, but still, it's William Hoffman doing little in jokes.
The one
just
that he
for
still
himself.
owed the Met for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Oh, that's lovely.
Because she's talking about being Marie Antoinette and everyone is a ghost and all of this other stuff. It's quite a funny scene. And again, it's a rather happy scene, but it's given us so much information, almost kind of without you knowing it. You learn about his brother, right? Saul does not like Rich's brother. And we've seen his brother before already, and he is kind of a clueless oaf.
But it's also really funny that Saul hates him because his brother will not remember Saul's name. And what does Saul do to Chet? And
Forgets his name.
Intentionally forgets his name.
That's true. He makes a point of
He
calling
makes
him
a
Chuck.
point of it.
Right. Yeah, because I think he already sees and he's already feeling a little jealous.
As soon as they have gotten through that back and forth, now we're back with a hospice worker and we're hearing from people with AIDS.
Yeah.
This is, again, written from a place of real understanding. And I feel like he's interested in this play in exploring not just that everybody has these stories, but that the more you hear these stories over and over and over again, the more they just kind of unify into one overarching narrative. He is as interested in the construction of sort of the AIDS narrative as he is in constructing a play about what it's like living with AIDS.
Yeah, it's like he understands that he is, well, I mean, he does. When he talks about the article, he's talking about writing the first AIDS play. He's talking about understanding his place in history. You see this with the letters from John Adams and stuff, and how he is always thinking about how people are going to write about the founding of America. And here, William Hoffman is trying to position, here's how we're going to talk about AIDS, not just now, 40 years from now.
Right.
On Vaccine Day.
Yeah, on Vaccine Day. And we get the full picture of it, right? It's not just gay men who are giving these stories, right? It's not just promiscuous gay men.
We have a monogamous, heterosexual, pregnant, married woman talking about her husband, who is a cop in Brewster in the Hudson Valley.
Yeah.
And he's got a heroin problem and got HIV through that. And his wife got HIV because she was having sex with her husband.
Right.
It's a less common story at this point in time.
But it's going to become more common, especially outside of the United States.
Absolutely. I mean, my first experience with AIDS, I certainly didn't know about it as like a sexually transmitted disease as a kid. I knew about it as a thing that was in Africa. And when my family went to Zimbabwe for a little period of time in 1999, like my parents were working at a clinic, specifically working with AIDS patients. You know, in the small town that we were in, there was a graveyard near that clinic that the guys digging those graves, I think they dug 10 a day.
Jesus
Every
Christ.
single day. These are people who, you know, they don't have headstones, so their graves are marked with like personal possessions, a shirt, a plate, things like that. And that for me was such a strong image. And then it was after that point that I started to learn more about the history of it, not just in Africa, but also in the United States and, you know, the West in that larger sense, and who was getting AIDS and how there was all of this inaction for so long. I mean, thinking back to Zimbabwe now, of course, so much of George W. Bush's administration actually was focused on curtailing AIDS throughout the world and throughout the African continent. And all of that has been gutted by Donald Trump in his second term. And you have to keep this picture. Yes, there is a part of the AIDS story that's very important, because when we start to understand this contagion and what it is, what comprises it, where all the scientific research came in, was when it was starting to, well into the epidemic among gay men in particular, in New York, in France, in the West. But it is a disease that, like so many diseases, it thrives on the margins, right? The disease itself doesn't care about anything. It just wants to feed. I think Hoffman said that. What we start to see with any kind of disease is how society is structured and who gets to slip out of that. And it's the people who aren't talked about who are affected the most.
I think sometimes too about how so much of what we were able to get done, as if I had any fucking thing
humanity,
to do with this.
Yeah.
Humanity, sure. What humanity was able to get done regarding AIDS had a lot to do with the class positioning of guys like Saul and Rich in this play, which is something that Hoffman is completely aware of.
Yeah,
obviously. But that, you know, it is because there were these guys who did have the money and the connections and the cultural cachet to make this thing a matter of national importance. It's sort of their capital, their cultural positioning, their cachet, right? That was able to raise enough awareness for this thing that pharmaceutical manufacturers, scientists were willing to start to develop solutions or attempt to develop solutions. And of course, that's how we ended up getting antiretroviral medications.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is still like, yes, it's great. These are incredible medications. These are incredible drugs, but it still is not a cure. It's not vaccine day. And access to these treatments, these drugs are so dependent on distribution networks, which are connected to capital, which are connected to, you know,
states,
exactly.
Right.
And the willingness of states such as the United States of America to essentially forego long-term monetary benefit for short-term loss, essentially.
I mean, it also tells you something about the way that AIDS narratives develop between As Is and Angels in America. Because I feel like Angels in America, again, we're talking about it. I got to it again. I got the fire in my chest. Feels like it's like, well, this happened in the way that we talk about COVID. Well, when COVID happened, People are still getting sick. People are still dying. With HIV in the United States, just looking at the United States, the peak of deaths from AIDS was the mid-90s.
Yeah.
And here's Angels in America coming out in the early mid-90s, where the present day is an epilogue to the story of AIDS, because it is so focused on a certain group of people in New York City specifically, right. And it therefore blinds itself to its existence anywhere else, right? There just isn't the same room for advocacy, for storytelling in the other parts of the country for the people who are not part of a privileged class of gay people, largely white gay people, in metropolitan centers, and very particularly in New York, even more than San Francisco even at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a very like male, like traditionally male gay men who are almost entirely white Christians and Jews. Like that's it. It's this thing too about narratives and how we build them, right? Where it's like, none of this is to say that the suffering, the death, and the loss that everybody has experienced is in any way less meaningful or significant than the losses, than the suffering of others. That's not the point at all.
Right.
The point is that when it stops affecting one group of people, and that group of people is the one who has the most influence, I guess, it's very easy to lose sight of the fact that this impacts other people constantly in different ways from what we see in these narratives that are set out very early on in the development of these stories.
Right. And I think that we can't expect every single play to like encapsulate every single experience, right? No. I feel like Angels is already long enough without having to cover like another peak, but it is interesting that you're right, Brian. It does take the approach that like it's over, it's done, we've beat it, but Vaccine Day has yet to come.
Yeah.
Right. And when you read something like As Is, which is so rooted firmly in the moment that AIDS is still spreading, it feels more effective to like sort of what you've been talking about like communicating outside of just one particular group. Because even though it is hyper focused on this one relationship of, again, two white gay men, it is more about treating people with AIDS with the dignity that they deserve.
Yeah.
Which is a universal thing that can happen regardless of whether you think the plague is over or not.
Right. And also, and this is a very important point, dignity that is currently being denied them. Right. And this is another example where I think the Normal Heart does a better job of showing it, but it's still very clear that what they are dealing with in their day-to-day life, they are not being accorded the same dignity and standard of care that is being accorded to people who are not gay, even people with HIV who are not gay.
Yeah. So in the support group, we have again kind of been looking at people who are not part of the main story, and they're talking about themselves. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of this was just verbatim, maybe cut down and made more efficient. But like, these are just people talking with very specific experiences. And then Rich talks. Rich is actually in this scene. He sounds like he's in denial. And he kind of is. He says, I'm feeling better. My lymph nodes have actually they're not swollen anymore. I think I'm fine. I think I'm not going to come back next week. And it turns out it's not just denial, but he is actually feeling better. Day to day, he's doing better. And we find ourselves in another scene with him and Saul, and he and Saul are going to fuck. That's basically this whole scene, is like the two of them are going to fuck.
Yeah.
Saul is lifting up Rich's shirt, and he finds a lesion. A Kaposi sarcoma, that distinctive purple spot on his back. Rich doesn't know that it's there. He's shouting at Saul. He's like, "You're going to fucking just leave me in the lurch like that?" And Saul can't get the words out.
Yeah.
And so Rich runs off stage to, presumably go look in a mirror. And the way that this is written, I don't know if this is actually how it was done. Certainly wasn't when we were doing it because we didn't have a curtain for it. But the way that it's written here is such a great directorial image where the hospice worker comes on and pulls a hospital curtain across that side of the stage. And then we basically do a scene in one, like an old musical will do, where they, the lower the curtain, they're changing the scene, and then someone sings No Business Like Show Business, like an Annie Get Your Gun.
Because then behind the curtain, you can do a scene change to get them into a hospital.
Right. This is probably the only time you've done any significant physical work to the stage. Right. You are changing the furniture up.
Yeah, this is a big, big, big image. And I got to say, this fucking worked for me.
Yeah.
When I read it, just like picturing how this would feel, being in the audience, seeing this. And also the moment where you discover a sarcoma for the first time, that's another staple now of these plays.
Yeah. Again, sort of subverted by Angels in America, where it's a little bit more cast off.
At the point that you're starting to display the lesions, you don't have a long time left, usually.
Yeah, and it's usually like, what's so great about this is that it transforms the loft, Saul's loft, this place of safety and security, into a hospital.
Right.
And once you go into the hospital, it's very unlikely that you leave it.
Absolutely. When we did it in 2018, there was like this sort of day bed that they were able to sort of shift around and make it look like a hospital bed while the other scene was going on. And I would run off stage and have to do a lot of very fast makeup, because the next time you see Rich, he's supposed to be very sick. So I had the one spot on my back. And then while I'm in the dressing room backstage, just painting sarcomas all over my arms.
And becoming gaunt in the face.
Yeah. I mean, there was nothing I could do about that. I was thinner then, but just like coming out there, that was the one thing I could do, because I wasn't Joe Mantello thin. But I could go out there with the splotches on my skin, and I had to do it then because I had short sleeve shirts for the rest of my costumes, and so I was like, I couldn't just do it earlier.
How did doing that feel?
I like to do my own makeup as an actor. I think that's part of creating the person that you are. You're sort of, you're creating another being, right? In the same way that someone who's maybe like carving a puppet out of wood and painting that would be creating someone new. You're doing that with your makeup. You're finding the different contours of who that person is. So I always treat it very reverently. And so it's the same thing applying those sarcomas. Even though I'm going fast, I'm having to color in these purple spots. Each one of those has a story. Each one of those developed over time. Rich saw as each one of those came into being. This was not a directorial decision, by the way. This was my decision. I came out the first dress that we had, and the director gasped seeing that. Yeah. Right. There's something that if you have had experience with AIDS, if you have seen that, there's no getting away from it. Right. Like, it's just a shocking thing to see. So that's another reason why, never ask for permission. Just do it and then see if the director likes it.
Okay, in this one very specific circumstance,
with whether it comes to, a simple acting choice, whether it comes to makeup, whether it comes to live ammunition, just just do it and then see if the director likes it.
Oh no!
But this scene also brings us to another point, right? We leave Rich and Saul. We go somewhere else.
Yeah, we're at a hotline.
We
now.
meet two people who are working for Gay Men's Health Crisis, right?
Right.
And they're doing the hotline work. And this is a very fun scene. There's a little bit of like Abbott and Costello in here, but it's also like these are two very queeny men. And part of the reason why these hotlines were so good was you're calling a gay guy. There's no judgment here. They know what you're talking about. You don't have to hide anything from them. They're not saving anything. They're just talking to you. They're not writing it down in a chart. They're just telling you, okay, here's some of the things that you can do sexually to avoid this, right? And so here we have these two hotline employees, Pat and Barney, and they're fielding different calls of all sorts. And this is what that sounds like.
Hotline. Shit. Lost him. Fucking phone.
So what makes you think he has AIDS?
Hello?
He's what?
The disease is spread mainly through the blood and the
American
semen.
Indians are not a risk group.
So wear a rubber.
There's half a zillion diseases he has symptoms of.
Make him wear a rubber.
Please hold.
Kissing is questionable.
Hotline. And your mother eats turds in hell. Thank you.
Myself, I don't do it on the first.
I would definitely check it out with a physician.
Stroking,
Spots?
holding, rubbing, mirrors,
I'm not a doctor.
whips,
Go to a
chains,
doctor.
jacking off, porno. Use your imagination.
So that's, after a while, their calls both end at the same time. They have a little break, right? They're fielding call after call. This is all day long work, right? So these two guys start talking about their disastrous love lives.
If I learned I had it, I'd shove a time bomb up my tush and drop it on Timmy for tea and meet his new lover, Jimmy.
And then they're like, their names are Timmy and Jimmy.
I swear, Jimmy.
I can't.
Timmy has told me so much about you. I've been dying to meet you. And kaboom, there goes Timmy and Jimmy.
Again, They're not saints. They're just people. They have these dark thoughts. They hate their exes. You know, they're having their own lives.
You know that Timmy and Jimmy look like almost exactly alike,
absolutely.
too.
You can picture this.
I love that Barney doesn't swear either. Like Pat is
tush.
like, fuck no, fuck this, fuck that.
yeah.
Barney is like, your mom eats turds. I'm gonna shove a time bomb up my tush. My tush.
My tush.
It's like the nicest way to say you're gonna
Shove it
go
on my tush,
suicide bomb your ex.
Fantastic. Also, nobody expects the time bomb suppository. That's rare.
No. That was the original Python sketch, actually.
Pat starts talking about work. He has a day job where he has to deal with Rich. This is an interesting device that shows up before this hospital scene and after the hospital scene. Of now, we're flashing sideways, not just to strangers, but to people who know Rich and who are talking about, and they kind of get to cover the time skip. This is part of your way of saying time is passing. We're not immediately at the hospital right after he gets the first Kaposi sarcoma. It's people who are dealing with him. And then he talks about like Rich shits in the tub and he's not incontinent. He just did it because he's an asshole. We then find ourselves, that big hospital curtain opens up. Rich is in bed and sick. And Lily is there, right? Lily is Chet's cousin. That's the whole reason that
the one who Saul was photographing earlier.
Yeah, and she's the whole reason that Rich met Chet. And Chet is dead. Rich never even knew any part of it, that he was sick.
And this is something too that people who lived through this era, you always hear them talk about how like you would just be hanging out with a friend and then you would learn out of nowhere, oh, that guy died. And you might not even have ever known that guy got AIDS.
Yeah, because it affects so many people so differently. And because you don't die of AIDS, you die of whatever has the opportunity to get in there.
And if you get an opportunity to sick infection that's really fucking nasty, you know, and the timing's right, you can go very quickly.
Yeah.
And it was taking very young men too, very young, very.
You'd go to a funeral and you'd find out at the funeral that someone else's funeral was in a couple days.
And again, Chet is younger, right? One of the big like underlying things is that Rich left Saul for a younger man.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he's gone as this like new layer to Rich, where it's like, well, fuck, Chet was young and like so strong, and what the fuck is that going to do for me? And it sends him into a doom spiral.
And when we're in this hospital, I mean, Rich is sick and he's weak, but he's not quite close to death, and he is really acting out. And he's being very cruel to everyone around him, being very racist.
Yeah, he's being as mean as possible in whatever way is going to hurt the most.
Yeah. The things that Rich says to Lily are just so, I mean, that's her cousin.
Yeah.
And then, he yells at a nurse enough that even the nurse, who's like used to this kind of shit, is like, fine, you know what? You're pissing me off, Rich.
The other thing that Rich does is once he is no longer in like freak out mode, he also then has the opportunity to open up. And he does that in kind of a way that we haven't seen him before.
Yeah.
Like really letting his guard down and being open.
So at this point, everyone has left them alone. Everyone has stormed out of the room because of Rich. And Saul is just there doing the crossword. And Rich settles down. And Saul is just sort of going through the crossword out loud. You know, Hitler's father. And then Rich finally says Alois. It's Alois Hitler. And this leads to Saul being like, you're always so much better at the fucking crossword than I am. I don't even know why I bother.
Right.
And so Rich says this. I've always loved words. I wrote poetry when I was a kid. My brother used to make fun of me. Winter, winter, how you glinter with holidays array. And the snow, we all know, is here all day. I was 9 when I wrote that. I had just come in from sledding down Indian Hill, a steep road that connects Jefferson Heights to the valley.
You showed it to me on our grand tour of West Jersey.
It was a late afternoon, just before sundown, and the sky was intensely blue and intensely cold, and you could see the stars already. For some reason, nobody was home when I came back, so I stood there at the stamped enamel-top kitchen table, dripping in my frozen corduroys, and wrote that poem.
Are you comfortable?
I was a good kid. But I was lonely and scared all the time. I was so desperate to find people like myself that I looked for them in the indexes of books under H. I eventually found them.
But not in books.
The next thing you know, I moved to the city and I was your typical office worker / writer. I hated my job. So I grew a beard and wore sandals, hoping they would fire me and give me permanent unemployment. I wanted to stay home in my rent-controlled apartment and drink bourbon and write poems. I did that for a period. I loved it. The apartment got filthy, and I did too, and I'd only go out at night to pick up guys. And then I found you in a porno theater. And we semi-settled down, and you took my picture, and I started to jog. We bought a loft.
And raised a cat.
And loved each other. But that wasn't enough for me. I don't think you ever understood this. You weren't my muse. You were Saul. I loved you, but I wanted someone to write poems to. During our marriage, I had almost stopped writing, and I felt stifled, even though our loft had appeared in New York Magazine. And then I met Chet, and I left you in the lurch and lived with him at the Chelsea Hotel. He was shallow, callow, and selfish. And I loved him too. We did a lot of coke, and I was writing a lot of poetry, and the catering was booming, and the New Yorker published a story of mine, and I ran in the marathon. I was on a roll. I remember training on the East River Drive for the first time. I didn't realize how narrow and dark the city streets were until I got to the river, and all of a sudden there was the fucking river. The sky was the same color as that twilight when I was a kid. I came from the darkness into the light. I'm running downtown and I make this bend, and out of nowhere, straight up ahead is the Manhattan Bridge. And then the Brooklyn Bridge. One after another. And my earphones are playing Handel's Royal Fireworks music. It can't get any better than this. I know it. I'm running and crying from gratitude. I came from the darkness into the light. I'm running and telling God I didn't know he was that good or that big. Thank you, Jesus. Thanks. Thanks. The next morning, I woke up with the flu and stayed in bed for a couple days and felt much better. But my throat stayed a little sore and my glands were a little swollen. Saul, I want you to do something for me. Will you do something for me, baby?
Sure, babe.
Now listen, I want you to go out of here and go to the doctor and tell him you aren't sleeping so hot.
I'm sleeping okay.
Now listen, you tell him you want something to make you sleep, and Valium doesn't work for you, but a friend once gave you some Secanol.
No.
I tried hoarding the pills
do it.
here, but every night the nurse stays to watch me swallow them down.
I can't do
that. I don't want to end up like Chet.
That's a whole life in 2 pages.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he's telling, right, Saul has to have some, maybe he just doesn't understand, you know, like Rich is telling the story of his life because this is his suicide note. He can't write it down. He's too weak to write.
And also that, like,
Saul knows this stuff.
Of course. And Saul's just like, yeah, I know, bud. Like, I was there.
I mean, I
know the poem. I know Indian Hill. Yeah.
I think that's partially it. And then as it keeps going on, I think it's sort of, Saul is just enraptured by Rich, right?
And you also see what it was about this guy that Saul fell in love with in the first place. Because, I mean, at this point, Rich is impossible to be around.
Yes. The whole time.
Pretty much for the entirety of the play.
The whole time.
And especially at this point in the play.
And Saul, I think you can also see why Saul didn't want Rich published. He wanted all of this for himself.
He wanted this to be the private whispers that he would get at 2 a.m. and instead it's the world's now.
And so, so Rich has done it. He's said it. He told the story of his life, and now he needs Saul to let him die. And this becomes a big, I mean, this is vicious. This is still a vicious, Rich is the old Rich. And he says, if you love me, you'll help me. That's how he phrases it.
God forgive me, I'm back to the old Rich.
Well, and that's that's not an uncommon thing with people who are on the verge of death, if to ask a loved one to just like, can you end this for me?
And I understand it. It's like he could be dying over the course of the next 5 weeks, or he could die tonight. And once you get to that point, it's a different question than the question of suicide in other circumstances.
And then into this situation marches Rich's brother.
And fucking dumbass.
But I think I actually really like this back and forth here between Rich's brother, who's never actually named, by the way. In the script, he's just called brother.
The climax of this scene is not really podcastable because it's physical.
Right.
The strengths of this scene, of this play, are always the physical, the embodiment of people in space. Because where this scene eventually goes, it's a short scene too, is they finally hug, and Rich doesn't let him do it until he does.
Right.
And his brother says, I don't care, Rich. And he starts calling him Richie.
Mm-hmm.
And Rich, there is no controlled part of him in this moment. And this is the only moment where that's true in this whole play, where he says, he can't finish the sentences. And there's a very clever way that Hoffman notates like where the sentence is going to go by putting the unspoken words in brackets.
But he can't say those words, and nor does he have shtick that allows him to defend himself from having to live with the weight of the things that he's experiencing.
And he just doesn't want to die. And Saul comes back and he tells us what he's done. Where instead of going to a doctor, like Rich said, he went to some street drug dealers and got enough of the pills to kill both Rich and himself. But the story doesn't end there.
I try to do what you asked me to do, just like always.
You don't have to apologize.
I want you to understand something.
I understand.
It's important. Listen. I made up my mind to give you half of the pills and keep the other half for myself. I was walking past Sheridan Square. It was starting to drizzle again. You've never seen Sheridan Square look grungier. A drunk was pissing on the pathetic little flowers. And that crazy lady, you know, the one that sings off key at the top of her lungs, she was there too. And my favorite, the guy with his stomach.
I get the picture.
There I was, walking with the pills in my pocket, contemplating our suicides, and I was getting wet and cold. As I passed the square, Seconal seemed too slow to me. You don't have a monopoly on pain.
I never thought.
Shut up. Anyway, I had stopped in front of the pleasure chest. I looked up, and there in the window were sex toys and multicolored jockstraps lit by a red neon sign. I said, "Help me, God." Which is funny coming from an atheist, let me tell you. I said it out loud.
And you could walk again.
Well, it wasn't exactly a miracle, that's for sure.
Thank God.
Anyway, there I was in front of the sex shop, and I looked down, and there was a puddle. Now, this will sound stupid.
Couldn't sound stupider than the rest.
In this dirty little puddle was a reflection of the red neon sign. It was beautiful. And the whole street was shining with the most incredible colors. They kept changing as the different signs blinked on and off. I don't know how long I stood there. A phrase came to my head. The Lord taketh and the Lord giveth.
You blew your punchline.
It's the other way around. Anyway, there went $200 down the sewer.
Take it off your taxes.
Don't you see? I just don't have the right to take your life or mine.
Oh, the miracle of the pleasure chest.
Hang in there, Rich.
Our Lady of Christopher Street.
Maybe I'm being selfish, but I want you here. I need you.
My future isn't exactly promising.
I'll take you as is.
That's the title of the play.
That is the title of the play. They have, this good little bit where Saul's like, well, anyway, Rich, it's a sin to kill yourself. So if you do that, they'll bury you with all the Jews.
Yeah. That's a really good
line. Go to hell with all the Jews.
If you kill yourself, they won't bury you in hallowed ground. You'll go to hell with all us Jews. It's a good line. So...
Because again, it's sentimental, right? At the end of the day, this is incredibly sentimental, but it's not treacly. It's not,
and that's the thing.
It's not cloying.
I know both of you know this better than just about anyone. I fucking hate sentimentality. In almost every circumstance, and this just fucking works.
And some people just do it right, man.
I gobble all that shit up. Are you kidding me?
I know you do.
Nom.
But I think it speaks very highly to the quality of the writing that even I would consider it to be acceptable.
Yeah.
I feel like you should declare that after every show you see. You should walk outside and be like, I think it's a testament to the quality of the writing that even I call it acceptable.
I'll find the playwright and tell him, yeah.
What ends up happening is Rich starts to think about, okay, I'm not going to kill myself. Fine. We'll let the disease take whatever course it does. Maybe I'll feel better for a while. Maybe I won't, but I know it's going to kill me. And so when I die, I need to have a plan. And he talks a little bit about the questions of reincarnation that I think a lot of people have in the modern day. I definitely thought about this as a kid of like, well, if you come back to life, that doesn't mean you're a person. Doesn't necessarily mean you're on Earth. The galaxy's really big. You could just be a worm in a swamp somewhere at the other end of the spiral arm.
Right.
And he comes up with a concrete plan. I want to be cremated, and I want my ashes to fertilize the apple tree in the middle of Jake's pasture. When you take a bite of an apple from that tree, you can think of me. And Saul says,
you'd be the worm in it.
And then Rich goes a step further, where he's not just making plans for his death, he's making plans for his life.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, there is this shop, this really scuzzy place. I want to read my poetry there. When I'm feeling better, when I'm out of this hospital, I want to go there. All these punks, people, gay, straight, with their weird hair and their ears pierced 99 different ways. And he says they look newborn and slightly depraved. And that's where he's going to read. They make that plan. Who knows if it'll happen or not. And then they decide to fuck. I mean, they decide to figure out what kind of sexual contact will be safe for them.
Right.
And the curtain gets drawn around them. Rich has this close the fucking curtain. And the hospice nurse does it for them instead.
Right.
Which is great. She's in the scene, and now she's back to her hospice worker scenes talking to us.
Right. She gets her final monologue.
And she talks about Richard, right? Richard is a part of her life now. These two stories have intersected. And what she notes in this monologue is that we have again skipped time a little bit, because she says he's been to the hospital twice now. So he did get better. He did feel better for a while. The play does not give you an answer, right? It does not kill him. It does not save him. There was no saving to be had in 1985. But again, it is so dedicated to being in the moment that it's written that it's living with that reality. You're going to leave that theater and you still might know somebody who's in the hospital. And what's great about this moment with the hospice worker is that we find out she's not just a theatrical device here, because she drops the mask and she yells at God.
But you'll be leaving the hospital again in a week or two, for a time. He's a real fighter. The angry stage is about over and the bargaining stage is beginning. If he behaves himself and is a good little boy, then God will do what Rich wants him to do. I certainly hope God does. Ooh, I don't know anymore. Sometimes I think I'm an atheist. No, ooh, not really. It's more that I'm angry with God. How can he do this? I have a lot of denials. I am angry, and I make bargains with God. And it's a long way to finding acceptance. Maybe I'm just suffering from burnout. But what would I do if I didn't come here? And it's a privilege to work with people who are dying. Sometimes they tell you the most fantastic things. The other night, Jean-Claude, a real queen, well, that's the only way to put it, he told me that the thing he misses most in the hospital is his corset and high heels. I mean, he can't weigh 90 pounds. He's half dead. I admire his spirit. The way they treat him. Sometimes they won't even bring the food to his bed. I'm afraid to complain for fear they'll take it out on him. Damn them. Well, I have lost a lot of my idealism, as I said. Last night, I painted his nails for him. Flaming red. He loved it.
End of play.
Yeah, and that's another thing is like this is a point where you have a lot of characters and a lot of situations of people who today would probably be out trans people, you know, and to talk about the effects of AIDS on the gay community, you can't go. I mean, you very easily can go without mentioning trans people, which is why it needs to come up as well, right? And so much of I mean, we see this in the UK with like the J.K. Rowling shit and all that fucking whatever is like this advocacy that's supposedly on behalf of quote LGB people, like this idea that we're protecting gay men by getting rid of the trans people, trans women and trans men that are involved in all of this.
Or we're protecting cis women from male predators.
More importantly,
the
cis heterosexual women that really need to use the John, I guess. And
cis homosexual women too, for some reason?
Allegedly, but the further that they get into this, the more they let that mask slip.
Yeah.
They hate any kind of deviation from the norm. And because of that hatred of deviation from the norm, whether that involves sexuality, whether that involves gender, or whether that involves things like intravenous drug use as well, when you have people who deviate from the norm and are therefore expelled from a certain sector of polite society, you know, they become safe to ignore. That's when things like this happen, right?
Yeah.
That's how people are able to get AIDS and then get more people infected and get more people infected because they don't have knowledge. They don't have a culture around it. They don't have the tools that they need to protect themselves and to protect others because we've decided that what they are and what they do is so distasteful that they are not worth addressing in any fashion.
Well, not only are they not worth addressing in any fashion, that it is actually probably good in the long run because this then exterminates that section of the populace, which is to the benefit of all of us.
Yeah, sort of Malthus for homosexuals and transsexuals. And it, you know, because one of the people who was in the cast, like her dad was, he wasn't HIV positive, but he was an intravenous drug user. And it was interesting while we worked on this play to hear about that side of the story, because that's another one that's really not told, right? And the devastating effects that it has in other countries, in Haiti, in Zimbabwe, you know, and the Zimbabwe story kind of did get told, right? In the 90s, you did sort of see AIDS as an African thing because it was such a, I don't know, it was a good locus of charity, right? You work on world hunger, you work on, you know, getting food and medicine to people or natural disasters. And so AIDS comes up then. And yet it's completely at the mercy of charity. Right. It's as far as people are willing to feel charitable about it, rather than a system that actually is able to address it with far greater resources and consistency.
That's kind of the point, right? As long as something is charity, it's a bonus. It's an extra. It's not something that is guaranteed.
Yeah. We don't want people to expect not to die.
We've been talking about this the whole time.
Yeah.
The way that narratives build around things and how oftentimes the first things that you seize onto end up setting the tone for the story that is going to be told for generations and generations to come.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that for me was most startling about going back to this play, which I had not read, by the way, Brian, before we did this episode. I know AJ had because, or at least had read parts of it because of like doing scene work in college, but it's the thing of when you watch something where it's like, oh, well, that's where that's from on some level, but it's not just something where it feels somehow trite or dated or in any way cliche. Whereas we sort of talked about with Casablanca, how some of the things in that movie have kind of become cliche.
Yeah.
There's not a great deal in this that feels that way.
No.
Maybe some of the stuff around like just, oh, I know where this story is going to go. And we're going to find out that he's gone from having the thing to the sarcoma to whatever. That's all ground that has been tread since. But it's all handled with such sensitivity that you don't feel the sense of, oh, well, here's the next beat. Whereas ironically, a lot of the stuff that will come after this, I think does feel that way.
Sometimes that's true. Like something, if it's the first, it's usually because there is a spark of imagination there that, and again, it's not the first. It's not really the first.
Right.
They say it's the first AIDS play. It's not really the first. It's beautiful.
It's not the first? You're telling me this now for the first time. That's crazy.
But like to be one of the first to broach the subject. And the fact that this has so many similarities with The Normal Heart is like, it's weird, but it's also so different in how it presents those same things, like the stuff with the brother. Yeah. It remains not something that's part of a genre, right? A genre is something that we construct afterwards through critical analysis. And then later on, you'll have The Inheritance or something that's like, this is a AIDS play. Right? I am making this fit this genre.
And then you'll have the episode of the other two where
which is
the two leads
just The
go
Inheritance.
to see an AIDS play.
It's so good. And
he just found out it was AIDS. It's been 6 hours.
And I mean, that's the other remarkable thing is like these plays can tend to be long. The Normal Heart shouldn't be long, but it absolutely can be because there's a lot of words in that script. This is a 90-minute ass play.
Yeah, As Is you're in, you're fucking out.
And it just sails. And there's just, it just contains these like signatures of like William Hoffman style. It is a William Hoffman play about something that is so immediate and so relevant. And because it captures it so well, it actually ends up still being good. For this reason or that, it hasn't kept that cultural staying power. But it's one that I think deserves to regain some of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's sometimes a play is like, it had its moment and it's gone now. But like, if we really want to understand the things that came after, especially Tony Kushner's work, like you have to look at this and you have to look at The Normal Heart and you have to look at these other plays. This is probably going to be downloaded by about 13 people. I always love doing an episode about shit no one's ever heard of. Everything I love is shit that nobody else cares about ever.
But you know what?
Episode,
I think I was on the least listened to episode of The Socialist Shelf. I was like, here, let's talk about Peer Gynt. And everyone's like, let's not.
We're putting it out on the free feed to maximize the exposure so that 13 people listen to it rather than 12.
Yes.
So if you are one of those 13 people, we salute you.
If you are the 13th person, the other 12, despicable.
No, seriously though, there's going to be more than that's true.
Scoundrels, a lot of them.
There's more than 13 of you, and we appreciate you listening to yet another episode of the show. Let us know seriously what you thought about it. We'd love to hear from you, particularly with these ones where we're digging into the lesser known stuff. We like to obviously talk about high profile stuff that everybody's heard of, but we also like to talk about things that are new to most people that we are particularly passionate about. So. And also, if you liked what you heard, don't forget to check out our very affordably priced Patreon, patreon.com/worstofall, where you're going to find a whole bunch more stuff just like this and about more popular stuff. Yeah, our Buried Child episode.
With Uriah.
Our episode about The Visit. You know, we do these every so often.
And musical theater, too.
We have them categorized on Patreon under groups. We've got a whole like theater group of episodes. So if you like this kind of shit, go check us out. There's more good shit behind the paywall. And either way, we just appreciate you so much for listening for yet another week.
So I have two little stories that I want to close this out with. The first was when I was doing this play. One woman who came and saw it was someone who had seen it on Broadway back when it first played. It was very nice, very complimentary. She talked about how she used to work in theater and she was in the chorus for Hello, Dolly, one of the big, because Carol Channing kept just doing tours of that thing for decades.
Oh, I know I did, darling.
I think it was one in the early 90s that she was in. And she was telling me everyone in that chorus, of all the men, only one is still alive.
Jesus Christ.
This is 2018 and every single one of them had died of AIDS specifically, except for that one guy.
And also, if you don't know Hello, Dolly, there's a lot of dancing men in that show.
A lot of men.
Yeah.
It's core to the whole title song of that show. There was this opportunity when you perform something old like this, right? You get to communicate with history itself. You get to see something that, Sophocles saw. You get to see something, and especially when it's recent enough, you can meet the people who were there in a way that I think it's hard for a lot of young queer people to find that community, and why theater is such an incredible place for it, either if the piece is brand new or if it's 30 years old. The other story that I want to tell is that right after Donald Trump was elected, the first time, I have to say that, the first time,
God damn it,
which was 8 years ago.
Shut the fuck up.
8.5 years ago.
No.
I was working nonstop. I was taking every background job I could. And I was working on a movie at the JFK airport. And we were in this holding area that was just this big, long hallway. And I met another extra there, this older guy who was just going out of his mind the same way that I was, but he had a different way of showing it. My way is I don't talk. I just get fully withdrawn and I try to work or something to drown it out. And his was, I've got to talk to somebody, right? As this play does the Christians versus Jews. That's the difference between Christians and Jews.
Right.
Yeah. This lovely man was just like, what's going to happen to us? What are these things that are going to happen? And in the process decided to tell me the story of his entire life. Which is one of the things I actually really loved about being an extra, were those moments where you just talk to somebody you've never met before and learn everything about them. He told me everything about the 80s and about what he lived through in the 80s, being a gay man and having a gay brother. And his brother got HIV and his brother died. And he spent years of his life taking care of his brother. And like a lot of gay men in that time, he just decided, that's it for me. I'm not seeking relationships. I'm going celibate. Tim Gunn has talked about this a little bit too. And it wasn't until just a few months before I met him, and he had also had some other stuff. He had had cancer and he had to have an eye removed, and he had a glass eye that he was very nervous about. I mean, I tell you, this guy told me everything.
And I mean everything.
And he talked about how, it was difficult finding that comfort in himself and in his face and in, feeling normal. But it was after that scare with cancer, he started going out again and started meeting people. He talked about the fact that for so many years of his life, for 25 years, he had just stopped living. And part of the reason he was working background on movies, part of the stuff, he was getting back into acting. And he said, at some point, you just have to live. And that's what this play finds. At some point, you just have to live. You can have whatever difficulties you're having in life, and you can have Jesus, I've had my fair share in these last few years of mental illness and the weight of history kind of falling on your head. But at some point, you're here. You're still here. So you got to do something with it. Even if it's small, like reading a book at a scuzzy bar or going and doing extra work on Ocean's 8. You got to live. I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. See you next week.